Life Science Nation has done an extraordinary job putting together a very talented group of early-stage life science executives, people involved in the fundraising process, to talk a bit today about what you have to go through to attract funding in today's environment. I'd like to introduce my panel members, and I would like to go through the panel, say a little bit about them, and then ask them to tell us about what their current venture is. Sort of a quick elevator pitch, and then we'll try and get into some more substance. Not to say that what they're doing isn't substantive. So, Gabor Bethlendy is the Chief Commercial Officer and founder of Parabase Genomics. He has 20 years of academic and industry experience in genomics and sales and strategic business development. He's worked on microarrays, targeted sequencing, diagnostics at Agilent and Nimblegen and Roche. This is his first startup, but he's raised $3 million so far for Parabase. He's got a bachelor's degree, bachelor's in science in biochemistry from University of Rochester and a master's from Syracuse. So what are you up to?
Trying to close this round.
What's your company up to?
Yeah, so as I was telling Barbara, our mission is really to save the lives of newborns that are affected by rare genetic disorders. So our mission is to create one comprehensive test for hundreds of genetic disorders that can be implemented in the NICU and try to get the kids diagnosed early and discharged early. And most of these disorders have treatment or management options. You know, your average baby that's in the NICU, they get 5 or 9 genetic tests before they get a correct diagnosis. Even in Boston Children's, they get it wrong majority of the time before your child would have a correct diagnosis. So it only gets worse when you move outside Boston and you go to other geographies, Latin America, India, and even Canada, believe it or not. So that's what we're up to right now.
Great. Sitting next to Gabor is Barbara Fox. Barbara is a bit of a Boston all-star. She's the founder and CEO of Avaxia Biologics, PhD from MIT, spent 20 years in the academy before starting Avaxia, and has raised $25 million from angels, which is an extraordinary accomplishment and proves that not only is it possible to raise a lot of money from angels, but often it's necessary to in the current environment. So Barbara, do you want to talk a little bit about Avaxia?
Sure. So Avaxia is a clinical stage biotech company located here in Boston. We're developing antibody therapeutics for gastrointestinal diseases. Our lead product is for pediatric Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, so really miserable diseases that afflict children, cause diarrhea, pain, delayed growth, pubertal delay, just many social issues that are associated with these diseases. A real unmet medical need. These kids have very few treatment options. We have our lead product is an orally delivered antibody therapeutic. It's already been through its first clinical trial in adults, and we're moving into pediatrics with our next clinical trial.
Great.
As you said, we've raised almost all of our money from a national syndicate of angel groups, and we're now transitioning into institutional investment.
So Michael, these 5 early-stage life science stints as a senior executive, raised $500 million, numerous pharma alliances, venture investment experience both at Norwest and Omega Fund and in seed funds, medical innovation fund, partners, and Alignment Ventures. Worked with Larry Bach at Avalon Ventures on company creation in the 90s and did 22 companies at that point.
Larry did 22. I just was hanging around for a couple of those.
So what are you up to now, Mike?
So I'm running a company called TomegaVax. TomegaVax is involved in immunotherapeutics. We're developing vaccines that elicit a profound helper T-cell response. We published an article about a year ago in Nature and Neuroscience, which indicated we can virtually eradicate SIV in rhesus macaques monkeys. So the strength of that, we got a lot of pharma interest. We just had gotten about $30 million from the Gates Foundation, and I'm now raising a $12 million round.
Terrific, thank you. Fred. So we're going to go backwards for a moment. So Fred is the president and CEO of BeneChill, which is a medical device startup focused on brain protection, and he's also on the board of, I'm not even going to try it, Mölnlycke Healthcare. Leading technology executive, 35-year track record of successful turnaround, providing successful growth of small, medium, and multi-billion-dollar medical device businesses. He has got a great eye for identifying new opportunities and being a change agent, and has great executional skills. So, Fred, do you want to tell us about BeneChill?
So BeneChill is focused on brain protection for any form of brain ischemia or swelling of the brain. We do that through a catheter we insert through the nose and spray a special liquid into the nasal cavity, by which we cool the nasal cavity and the brain rapidly. That increases brain activity and therefore oxygen demand. So anytime there's an issue with brain oxygenation, which could be due to cardiac arrest, for example, or could be due to circumstances during surgery procedures, this device will actually help protect the brain of the patient. The biggest opportunity we're after right now is cardiac arrest. There's currently only about 20% survival rate for cardiac arrest in the United States and Western Europe. It happens about 1.2 million times per year. Joan Rivers just went through a procedure like that or an incident like that. And most of these patients die because of issues with the brain. In fact, even 2/3 of the patients that survive have brain damage. It's all about the fact the brain doesn't get any oxygen. So we are in a definitive clinical study at the moment, randomized multi-center study in Europe to definitively prove that this technology will indeed improve brain intact survival.
So if Joan Rivers had chilled out, she might be with us today.
She would have had a fighting chance, absolutely.
So Richard Gauthier, our final panelist, has worked for the past 5 years with Microbiotix, which is a Worcester-based firm with 2 phase 1 antivirals and 2 antibiotics in preclinical, and a successful track record of raising over $70 million in non-dilutive funding, which is pretty impressive. 28-year pharma biotech veteran. First job was with Sterling Drug. If you remember them, you shouldn't be here.
Now. Your whole panel is going to leave.
He's worked in distribution, sales and marketing, finance, and for the last 19 years in business development with progressively smaller and earlier stage companies, which is a great direction to be going in. So,
it's a nerve-wracking direction to be going in, but it's a lot more fun. So we have, Microbiotix has a couple of clinical stage antiviral programs. The first is in the extremely competitive field of hepatitis C. Our molecule, MBX700, is a potential best-in-class non-nucleoside NS5B polymerase inhibitor. It's the most potent non-nucleoside out there, out of the ones that are in clinical development, and it's the only irreversible one. So we think that those two things combined will make for a compelling compound in this extremely competitive field. It is going to be, it's been through a phase 1A trial and has been very safe and well tolerated. We're going to be developing it in combination, obviously, with multiple compounds with complementary mechanism of action, those that are currently on the market that have just been approved, and those that will be joining the market over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. Our goal is to achieve a once daily, safe and well-tolerated treatment, 8 weeks or less. So current treatment, which is just standard of care, just changed from 48 weeks to 12, and now everybody's into the boat for 8 weeks or less. Our second program, MBX400, is a safer and more potent nucleoside for cytomegalovirus, and that's mostly for transplantation, and also in the pediatric setting. It has, at least in the preclinical and in the phase 1 that we completed, a better safety profile, and it's a lot more active than the current gold standard valganciclovir. As Rick mentioned, we've never had any angel financing or any VC financing, and so now that we're in the clinic, it's time to get a few more bigger dollars for those much more expensive trials.
So thank you all. I'm actually quite honored to be these impressive executives. So what I'd like to propose is that we work through a couple of frameworks. for what the early stage fundraising process looks like, how you do outbound marketing to bring money in. And so I proposed two frameworks for us to talk ourselves through. The first is what I call the 4S framework: sourcing, screening, segmenting, and selling. Sourcing is how do you find people who've got money that might be appropriate investors. Screening is, now that you've identified potentials, how do you decide whether you should pursue them or not. The third is segmenting, and that has to do with timing and when do you bring them in and how engaged do you get them when, if they've gotten through screening. And the last is selling. How do you, once you've identified somebody who is or should be a hot prospect, how do you move them through? And I've got a 3C framework for that. Content, what do you deliver to them and how do you come up with it? Communications, how do you get yourself and stay in front of them? What techniques do you use? And finally, what I'll call chasing or closing. This is, you've been communicating, you've been giving them content, but how do you get them across the finish line? So let me come back to sourcing and ask people on the panel, how have they found good investors?
Since I'm the young buck, I'm both here. So I did it sort of maybe the simple way. It was the first company that I'm starting, coming out of Roche, and I was in sales and business development. So for me, you know, I did what I always did in business development. I dug up the leads by my own, but realized pretty quickly that you know, with the money we got from friends and family, the runway was pretty short, and I didn't have time to be Googling and looking through websites and all this riffraff. So I actually was using the life science database, and I was so afraid that my partner and founder, Andy Buttigieg, would give me such crap for spending money on it. I bought it at my own funds. And so I started using that. But the interesting thing that I found is that I did sort of what any good scientist would do. I did two things. I contacted people in my own network, and I did database thing in parallel. And what I found funny about it is that I think now with email and social media, I think the cold, what used to be cold, is not cold anymore. To me, they're actually warm. You know, in other words, you know, the responses that I got from people that I would have never reached otherwise were just as rapid for me as they were from the people that we knew in our network. And that actually was surprising because I was expecting to be completely blown off, which was not the case. And so the analogy I like to use is, you know, the way I met my wife, you know, wasn't a warm introduction. She was she had trouble closing an ultracentrifuge in the lab where we were doing postdoc. And I went to help her, of course, you know. And, you know, it wasn't an introduction, it was a cold thing. And actually, the biggest investor we have in this round right now is a cold lead from this database. So I didn't expect that. True, the majority are from people we know. But certainly, it was worth the effort. Because being new, I haven't raised 70 million or 200 million. Don't have a network. Maybe the next round I might do something different.
I've had a similar experience. The non-dilutive funding that we have raised has all been through either NIH, SBIR grants, Department of Defense contracts, those kinds of things. And so we've never gone out either to talk to venture capitalists or angel investors. So we're starting at zero. But we've been in the industry long enough and we knew enough people, so we started calling and talking to people in our network, and some of them were venture capitalists. And we took about 6 months. We figured we'll take 6 months, we'll knock on all of those doors, friends of friends that know people. And the response was a lot less than I thought it would be. I think I got, as you mentioned, a better reply or response rate from, and I don't want to plug Life Science Station. That's not what I'm doing, but I am. I got a much better response rate from the people that were either mandated or that were part of the database. We did a lot of work in looking at which ones, so we we didn't do a blanket mailing. We read through every single, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of investors are on that database, but I went through everything that was on the database and then on the website and read every single thing about the website to see whether these people were appropriate to approach for our company. And so it took a while. It took quite a long time to do that. And so I think I was disappointed in the friends and family.
Me too.
But we did get in front of a bunch of people that we would not have otherwise gotten in front of.
So Barbara, you had a very different strategy.
Well, I mean, we didn't have a database. I mean, I guess my number one rule of thumb has always been that the quality of the introduction is extraordinarily important, and you know, you need to, and it's really labor intensive. And I think, you know, using a database as a place to get an initial set is a fantastic and very efficient way to do it. But to set that initial source, you know, you have to know, because it lists who's actually looking to invest, and that's more important than anything else. It's who's got capital that they're looking to put to work. But if you are an unknown, or you have a technology that people may not have heard of, or they don't have any other way of vetting you, having somebody vouch for you, having somebody vet you that they know best is a CEO for one of their, that's already in their portfolio. I mean, there's a whole kind of range of things, but basically people who can speak to you, but that's not the sourcing, that's kind of the next step you want to get to. So I mean, we just did it through, you know, you go to a million conferences and you find out who's there, and you talk to people and you network with people, and you treat, through your entire career, you treat networking as a part of your job, because that's how you, I think it's all about people.
Were you able to get to the extraordinary number of angel groups that you went to? Did you use Gust or any other system, or was it really just networking through the conferences?
You have to use Gust just because they all want you to have stuff up there, but I didn't do any outward, any sourcing through that.
Are people familiar with Gust?
It used to be AngelSoft.
It's basically a service that's provided to angel groups that allows them to manage deal flow. And a lot of angel groups, like Mass Medical Angels, which I'm on the board of, uses it to source all of its deals. So you have to apply through Gust, and it's a good way to get your documents to angel groups. It's not necessarily a warm introduction. In fact, it isn't a warm introduction.
I mean, I think I may have tried and never got anywhere, but you know, things like, people, especially with angel groups or angels, they want to invest locally anyway. So, so once you have your leads, you may be able to source sort of other people coming in externally, but those lead investors have got to be local.
We actually got somebody, believe it or not.
Through Gust?
Through Angel, because I was forced to do it because you applied to these things and they force you to do the 350 character
Right.
thing of your company, and yeah, we actually got, but interesting, it was an investor from China. So the local thing was, but I agree, it was, otherwise, yeah.
Fred, do you want to?
Yeah, so in particular on the sourcing and a little bit in the screening side, you know, I think many of us go through this process whereby, you know, some member of the board tells you, why don't you go talk to these people, why don't you go talk to these people? And we spend a huge amount of time and effort to talk to a lot of people with very little knowledge about what they are interested in, what strategy they have, what kind of investment strategy they are really pursuing. And so I've really found myself many times in the scenarios where I was, you know, introduced, but it wasn't at all a fit for their own investment strategy. So I actually have to concur with some of my colleagues here that once I started to use the Life Science Nation database, I actually had a higher return on the response that I got. Now, to put it in perspective, if I would do it the old way, I would get maybe one response out of 100, and I'll just kind of give you some gross numbers. If I would do it to the Life Science Nation base, I got more to a 10% response. So it's still a low absolute number, but it's still, you know, an improved number over, you know, just trying to figure out who's going to be able to give you money. The other point I'd like to make is that I think it works both ways. I think that companies need to find the right investors, and investors need to find the right companies. And I also believe that the investors are inundated with a huge amount of information that comes to them all the time, yet it doesn't fit their profile. So I actually believe that, that by using an appropriate database, whereby a first selection can be made for the right investment strategy, works for a more efficient process on both sides. And that's why I think also the investment community is interested in better tools to connect the right people. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, for me, I have a little different experience. I've been in the venture business, one of the largest, oldest firms in the country. So I pretty much I know pretty much everybody who invests institutionally. However, since the crash, what's happened is we have had a precipitous decline in the venture capital business in life science, and particularly in certain sectors of life science. And so the old rules no longer hold. So, the fact that, a whole bunch of VCs is irrelevant. So I was cast back into, how do I do this? And the Life Science Nation people, were the clearest, gave me the clearest exposition of how it had changed. The ascendancy of hedge funds, private equity funds, family offices, and angels. And I didn't have a clue as to how to approach those people because I lived totally in an institutional world previously. So they've helped, and just networking, going to conferences, Barbara said, talking to the CEOs. When you hear about a firm, read about their portfolio companies, see if there's a fit, go talk to the CEOs, all that stuff. That's how I do it.
Yeah, you can't go in, just to speak to your point about it, you need to know what they're looking for. To send something in, whether it's cold or through an introduction to a firm where, you're an early stage company and they only invest in like clinical is a waste of everybody's time. It makes you look really bad. So you've got to do your homework, whether it's through a database or just reading their website or talking to people. You've got to do your homework.
One other point on sourcing is the thing that I found interesting is that, so we're closing around on this syndicate of angels, but the interesting thing is that out of the 148 people I spoke to from the database, which I trimmed from 600, by the way, to give you an idea of what I did in 4 months. What's interesting is the next round is there's a list of 7 VCs who are interested to look at us. So I actually keep them up to date, using my outbound stuff in HubSpot, and I update them. Publication coming out, so it's sort of lined things up a little bit. I think the lifting on the next round will be a little bit easier.
That's really important because when I was investing, we want to see what a company says they're going to do, follow their progress. It's always at least a year's contact, grooming, discussion, all that before we invest.
So just to quickly summarize, for sourcing, it used to be people think, let's go talk to VCs, and there's been such a decimation of the VC category that you now need to look more broadly in sourcing. You start with family, friends, and I call it lovers. This is basically not people that you've been married to, but people who have invested with you in the past and think that you're a good executive. That's where you start to get your early money, but then you have to do things like go to angel groups, sometimes through Gus, sometimes just by networking, and you have to take advantage of lists, particularly well-vetted lists. You can buy lists out there, but they don't get you anywhere. But if you get a list that has qualified and identified and helps you to screen in the next step, that's very important. And the one other thing that I would add that Thermalin's had a lot of success in is we actually created our own specialty list of people who were potential angel investors who were very interested in diabetes. We did this basically by combing the web for people who had made contributions in the diabetes space, significant ones, and therefore would be accredited, and approached them. And we were able to raise a fair amount of money that way with only one angel group participating in our effort. So a lot of ways to source. Screening, as the panel's been talking about, is incredibly important. And as Barbara said, you got to screen out the people who don't invest early, or at least put them on the list of people to follow up and keep up to date with. What else do you have to look at when you're looking at potential investors and screening them in or out?
So if you're looking for institutional investors, how old is their fund? How recently did they raise it? Everybody will
Why
always,
is that important?
Because venture funds usually have a 10-year span. So if they're investing out of a fund, and they'll make early investments, and then they'll set aside, you could talk about this much better than I could, but anyway, they set aside money to reinvest in their portfolio company. So they're always going to have money in reserve, and they will always tell you that they are currently investing because nobody ever wants to be dead in the water, and they always want to be talking to you. But if they're 6 years into their fund, they will not invest in you. They'll always say, well, we have one more investment, and they just won't unless it's a really something they think they can flip in a year. So you have to know. What their fund life is. You want to make sure you go to the right partner. So you have to really do your homework on that, because the partner you first go into is the partner you, in most cases, are going to be locked with. And if it's the wrong person, you are going to have a hard time extricating yourself from that situation. I've done that before. And that's particularly dangerous if somebody else makes the introduction. If somebody very well-meaning says, oh, here's an introduction in, and then you've gone in the wrong way and you're really stuck. So tell people who want to make introductions to ask you first. What else? What's their therapeutic area? You know, are they invested in something that's directly competitive to you? Many venture firms, and I suspect angel groups, will talk to you solely for competitive intelligence. It's nothing insulting, it's just what they do. They're investing in somebody that looks just like you. They bring you in, they can pick your brain, it's free consulting. They may not have any, you don't have any real alternative, you gotta talk to them anyway, but you should at least kind of have your eyes open. And if they're invested in something directly competitive, don't go talk to them.
Or if they've already done, a couple deals in that space, their appetite for another one, they're trying to create a diversified portfolio. So their appetite for, the fifth company in that space is not going to be too great.
But if they just made money in that space, they might
that's
be looking for
different.
you again.
Yeah, that's different.
So yeah, I would underline all the things you just said. The other thing is, what kind of life cycle of the company do they typically invest in? Do they invest early? Do they want to see clinical data? Do they want to see commercialization already happening? They sometimes have very clear criteria as to what they invest in. And they would say, oh, you have no clinical data? We don't even need to talk, unless they want to hear the story for their own benefit. So that's another criteria that plays a role.
Yeah. And then even more obviously, device versus pharma. I mean, they're most of them are totally one or the other.
And oftentimes it's not too clear from their website or the types of companies that they've invested in the past where they currently are in terms of life cycle of company that they'd like to invest in. So they might say they invest everywhere from preclinical to phase 3, but they're not really looking at anything.
They look at what they've done, and or what their team has done in the past, and it's a whole different story.
Yeah, and so and we've come across this multiple times where we have phase 1 data, and they say, well, we're really looking for for human efficacy data, and we like the story, but come back to see us, which is fine.
Which is good.
Yeah, but yeah, so they're not all. They don't all invest from research through to phase 3.
What about disease area? Do you ever find that?
For us, it was quite painful because we're in diagnostics. That's a big X mark with venture folks. As you say, diagnostics is all cardio, diabetes, late onset. No one thinks about babies. And so, actually that was difficult to pull out of the, if I put in like newborn neonatal diagnostics, I got 0. For you Googled iPad 10 years ago, so I think there's limitations to databases and Googling all these things. So for us, I just put diagnostics, and I had to weed through all the junk of late onset stuff, because you're right, I think that when I sent emails to folks who had invested in genomics and what these things, the response was very, very, or if they were competition. I had like 3 or 4 that afterwards I found out that they ended up investing in competitive things.
I think that investors all have limited time to look at a deal. And if it's in a space, diagnostic therapeutic device that they're not familiar with because they mostly work on other deals, it becomes more expensive for them to get involved with it. And if it's in a disease, let's say they're not used to doing CNS, they've done a lot of cardiovascular. Again, there's a lot of learning curve that they have to invest in to follow your deal. So you want to look for investors, VCs, others, who have some kind of experience or affinity for the problem that you're trying to solve.
And they're also looking for, and I think this gets back to the warm introduction thing, they're looking, they're getting hundreds or thousands of slide decks and executive summaries they're looking for some filter on that. And if it's coming from somebody they know, they'll look at it. If it's coming, they're scanning through it, they know the institution you came from, or they know one of your clinical advisors, or they know somebody on your board, or something that says, this is worth investing in, and not like, I have no idea what they're talking about, flip. I just won't look at it. So you're just looking for a hook, and think about it from their perspective, some reason that they should take you seriously, that they should invest the time it takes to read through your slide deck.
Yeah, I used to look at 1,000 deals a year, and it's just,
unimaginable.
it's overwhelming. You don't have time to have linear thought in the venture business. It's very different than running a company, operational company.
Which also speaks to, it typically is a step-by-step process, which many times, we all are living in our own world and we know so much about what we do and so enthusiastic about it, we tend to forget. And we want to go in and tell them all the details. Well, you first have to get to the hook. So you first have to really get a high level, well, this is really what it is, are you interested in that? And then if they are interested, a more question, you can go deeper and deeper. So it's really a step-by-step process as well.
We used to tell people, you got to refine the excitement. If you can't tell me in 2 paragraphs why this is going to change the world and make me a ton of money, I'm on to the next one. And that's cruel, but it's survival. You do it that much, deal flow.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one phrase there, which was, and make me a lot of money. Because this is what I think early stage and many late stage companies trying to raise money miss. You're pitching a way for the investor to make money. They don't care about how you're gonna, what your great vision is and where you've come from. They want to know how you're gonna make the money. If you can't tell them the story of how you're gonna make the money, when, how much goes in, how much they get out, you're not gonna get their attention. So let me turn us now away from screening in just very briefly to segmenting. And this is, you've got a list of people who you've screened in, you think they're good candidates. How do you prioritize how you chase them, and what are kind of the, how do you sort of group who you do now and who you do later?
Well, you've got a lead.
Yeah, you need a lead.
I mean, the lead is 75% of the work. Once you have a lead, they're like herd of lemmings. But without a lead,
You get a lot of people saying, well, when you get a lead,
right,
come back.
exactly.
Being new, that's exactly what happened to me. And when I got the lead, like 4 months into it, then it was like the rest of the money just pretty much showed up. And once I started sending emails to the ones I spoke to later that said, oh, we have a lead investor lined up, that was like, send me the documents, a more different level of discussion, no more market size BS and all that stuff. It was about the actual numbers of the deal.
Because somebody has actually done the work, they figure. They don't want to dive in and do the work from the beginning. It's a lot of work to do fundamental due diligence.
Yeah, it's that, as well as, oh, you've been able to convince this group? Oh, okay. And then, these other investors go like, oh, okay, so that reduces my risk profile right there. Without even having to do much work at all. So there is a lot of, it's totally different if you start cold and you just have to find your first investor, compared to you have a lead investor and then you have to round it out with additional investors.
So take off on that one thing. So once I figured this out after about 4 months of hitting my head against the wall, and we had the lead investor, or I knew I had to find the lead investor, it was so much easier to screen the investors. Because I asked them, we're looking for a lead. We have 4 or 5 people that will follow. Can you lead? And it was like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, boom, boom, boom. The process was 10 times faster. Like, they didn't ask me all these silly questions.
Right, because a lot of them just won't. It's
They
not
just
their
won't.
business model. That's not what
Now,
they do.
I have no idea how you've done this in the angel space. In the institutional venture space is one thing, but angels, they don't communicate with each other.
Angels are very different. So the lead investor accomplishes 2 things. One, it shows that you've raised money, and you can short circuit that a little bit. And this is, I think, something people don't appreciate. So when you get that friends, you call it friends, family, and lovers. I always heard it as friends, fools, and family. So it's not as nice. Not as nice. Those people who will really give you money. If you take that really early money and you just spend it, and then you go out to make progress, and then you go out and say, look at all this progress I made, now I'm starting from 0. You're not in very good shape. What you're better off is you take that money and you say, I have already got committed, $500,000. It's almost like a public sector capital campaign. So you think about appeals from a university, they will never start a capital campaign until half of it is raised. So you need to do the same thing with angels. You say, I've got half of it already committed or soft circled or whatever you kind of from your own personal integrity feel comfortable saying is that level of commitment of those followers. So that at least gives people some comfort that they're not the first dollar in. Nobody wants to do that. You still need to get somebody to do the diligence, and you need somebody to do the legal diligence.
And price the round.
And price it. Sometimes for angels you can just get away with, doing notes and stuff. So you can get around that a little bit. So it's a little less onerous to get that lead investor on the angel side. It's more getting those first dollars, and you can get that from your friends and family. It is a little. It's not. Because you can do rolling closes, you can do it, it's all a little bit softer than it is on the institutional side, where that lead investor really is just putting the stake in the ground and pricing.
Yeah, I think that's really true for angels, is that you can put out a term sheet and you say, here's what we're raising.
Because you build the term sheet yourself.
You build the term sheet yourself. If it's a fair term sheet, then you're going to get some people who will start to sign up. You can start talking about soft circling. If you're doing a rolling close, we, for example, have closed almost $6 million on a $14 million round. So I've got $6 million in on my round, same price. And that really builds momentum for other people putting more money in. So you basically generate your own lead and it's all about momentum. So the other thing in segmenting, we talked about this a little earlier, is that as you're going through, you'll find some people who say, well, you need human data or you need to be closer to the clinic. Those people go on your follow-up list, and you just keep sending them updates so that when the time comes to do a later round, you've got a bigger pool of people who've already had some taste of what you're about. So let's turn to selling and the 3 C's of selling: content, communications, and chasing and closing. So let's talk about content. What is it that you need to put together? What do you need to say to people? What's the key part of the message?
First, you gotta have a PowerPoint.
Don't ramble.
You gotta have a 1-page summary. You gotta have a 3-page summary. You gotta have a good, pithy PowerPoint. And you don't screw around with a full business plan or a PPM right away. You get your hooks out there, figure out who is live. You can write the rest of that stuff as you're going. That's my experience.
There's a million things on what you put in a pitch deck. I mean, it's all standard stuff. But basically, is how are you going to make money, and why is this exciting, and not technology, because everybody will just say, okay, I give you, it works.
I struggled a lot to arm wrestle with PhDs in our company to write the 1-pager. They just overburden people with unnecessary complications of verbiage and blah, 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 that it took us like months to just get a 1-pager down.
It's really hard.
And but in the end, what forced us to do it the best is when we had an investor who told us to put things on Gust and AngelList, and I ended up doing it, and I cut out the PhDs because they just blew everything up into a 20-page white paper.
All right, so lesson number 1, if you have a company full of PhDs, get somebody who's got some startup, venture, business, something experience to write the
Or a writer. There's plenty of
Make them
PhDs.
explain to your 3-year-old.
Right. Well, but
That's another one.
Right. But it can't just be a medical writer. It has to be somebody who knows how to communicate business issues. So what about data? How do you deal with data?
You need a little bit. No error bars.
Just to be there.
Plotted up and to the right, everything. I'm a PhD. Learning to do business science presentations was really hard. Like, you don't need to show every last control. You're supposed to sort of absorb that yourself. You're committing to people that they want to invest in this. You're not sitting there saying, well, we showed it in this mouse strain, but of course I can't really say that it will work in that mouse strain. I mean, all of those caveats that as a scientist you're used to presenting, you got to get rid of. And yeah, it's like just really simple. It's like marketing science presentations.
I think distinguishing your product from the gold standard therapy, what are the key differences that you have that if the current standard of therapy has nephrotoxicity and yours doesn't,
right,
and that's one big thing, then you put that out right up front. So it pays to pay attention to who your competitors are and what their products are like, and how yours is sometimes just incrementally better. If it's a tox issue and yours is not toxic or much less toxic, then you have a product. And so putting those things out front helps you what it is.
So I think that you can see through discussion already how difficult it is to put this one pager together, right? So in my mind, it needs to be really about what's the problem you're trying to solve, why is that meaningful, and then how are you going to turn that into a real value for the investors. That's about what needs to be on that first page.
And the team.
And then an important aspect additionally to that is you have an additional experienced team, et cetera, was able to be capable of pulling it off. But those are the key elements that you need to try to get on one page, and that's like the first step. And then you talked about a 3-page deck, which is a little further than that, which is probably the second step. And then you get into more of a discussion. Then they're going to start asking all these questions about all the specifics and the data, and that's a time when you need to have, oh yeah, well that's this and I have this. But it's more on a Q&A basis.
You got to get them invested. We should talk about. You got to get invested in the process, right?
Yeah, right.
If this is just, oh my God, this is one more of the 1,000 I'm looking at pitch, that's no investment. If you get them in, okay, this looks good, the next level looks good, the next level looks good. All of a sudden, they've spent time and money, and of course, they all know that that's some cost, but they don't.
So, top down, design your presentations from the smallest message and then the things that support it. Don't start out with the ocean and try and boil it down until you get gobbledygook in your summary. Just quickly, technologies for communication. Talk about PowerPoints. What else? How do you reach people? How do you follow up? What do you do?
We have a 2-minute little video. That's why I would say doing one. We have outbound to HubSpot. Landing pages, all kinds of, mostly
Email.
I use Salesforce.
Email is the most important one of my markets.
I use Salesforce.com a lot.
Yes, we've used it too. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It's a numbers game, raising money.
I use LinkedIn too, quite a bit. I mean, for networking and meeting people. Even sometimes different, they'll communicate more easily on LinkedIn through email. It's bizarre. Every person, some people like phone, some people like email, some people like Facebook.
Never know.
Yeah, you never know. You got to find that person's style.
Anybody want to comment at the end on kind of the chasing and closing process? How do you actually get people over the, you've sent them stuff through email and other means, how do you now get them to actually write you a check?
You have to create a sense of urgency, that if they don't do this, they will lose the deal. And that is so hard to do. And it's so hard to do because you can't kind of make it up because everyone will see through you. You can't say, like, if you don't come in now, it's going to be gone forever.
Trains leave the station.
But it's really hard to do. So you want some level of competition because otherwise people have, they'd always rather wait. Come back when you've done this, come back when you've done that. I mean, it's really tough.
What, you're going to run out of money and the price will go down?
Yeah,
Cynically,
so as I've been told by lots of investors, the fact that you need money is not a reason for me to invest. That's a really hard lesson to learn.
And in fact,
you
it
can't
goes
just
back
say,
to
but I really need the money.
And in fact, it goes back to your earlier point is when you have the funds, that's actually when you should go out and get more money. Because at that point in time, you're in a stronger position. If you wait until all your funds are already down the bottom, you really put yourself in a much more difficult position. And because this process is so hard, we all tend to do that. It's like, well, I got a lot of money in the bank, I don't need to worry about it yet. But at the end of the day, you're better off if you raise money earlier as opposed to later.
See, I have one exception to that. After a closing, I always take a weekend off before I go back to A couple of questions from the audience in the back.
So I guess we have two sets of VCs. One is pharmaceutical-based corporate VCs, and then we have the regular VCs.
First of all, pharmaceuticals become much more important because now it's not show me phase 2 data. It's, we want to do a research partnership clinically, right? So, but to get to the pharma companies, and I'm talking about a bunch of them right now, you've got to get the science champion. You've got to get your scientists talking to their scientists to get them excited. It's useless to go the business development route. You've got to get the scientists excited and talking about it. And then use your champion in the pharma company to be viral throughout their firm to get the excitement. Otherwise, you're toast.
Yeah, I would second that. We always try and get our chief scientific officer to talk to the scientist in the infectious disease group at such and such company.
Right.
Get the dialogue going over a number of months, and then when there's a level of excitement, call me and I'll speak to the business guy afterwards.
But on the corporate venture side, there's sort of two, they split. There's two types of corporate venture groups. Some of them are completely financially driven. They're just like any other VC. They're there to generate a return. They don't care if there's a fit with their corporate strategy, and you approach them just the same way you would any other venture. For the ones that are strategically focused, you need to really be paying attention to what their strategy is, and it changes all the time. So it's always a little bit challenging to do, but you still approach them the same way. You just have to kind of be attuned to the fact that they're only going to invest in things that are going to be of interest to their parent company. But they're really just like any other venture group.
A lot of the parent companies have on their business website, they have all of the things that they're looking for in each therapeutic area, what they're looking at. You should definitely look at all those and make yourself a database of all of those things. And they do change, sometimes on a 6-monthly basis.
Sometimes they are a little bit more approachable.
And they are. They've been a lot friendlier than.
But you've got to be aware that they have a premier set of people to do due diligence with. So ignore that at your peril.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Your story has to be
right.
Has to be right.
Rich, you mentioned you went strictly after non-dilutive capital. I'm wondering if you in particular, but anyone pursue venture philanthropy organizations, and if so, what your experience is?
Yeah, venture philanthropy in infectious disease is a little bit more difficult, so not really gone that route, unfortunately.
We're just starting to. There aren't any foundations that have a real who have done a lot of venture philanthropy in the areas that we're working in. I mean, there's only there's about 6 or 7 that you can think of that have done a lot of it. But we've gotten a pretty warm reception, even though they don't make direct investments in companies. They will make introductions to some of their donors if they think it's of interest to you. So, and I would definitely always approach the foundations, disease foundations, because even if they won't give you money, it's good to get their perspective. They're a great validating source for other people. They will speak on your behalf sometimes. So, just good relationships to build.
JDRF, after more than a year's worth of courting, entered into $1 million partnership with Thermalin. And so it can be terrific, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of relationship building and a lot of science.
In late stages of approaching the chase and the close, and you're trying to create that sense of urgency, if the venture capitalist says, who else are you talking to? What's the right answer?
It's a really good question. At the right time, if you've got other people, and you think you can get them to start acting by talking to each other, you have to let them talk to each other. On the other hand, if you've got enough people that you might want to have a couple of separate syndicates form, then maybe you segment them and you see who's going to fit and try and get 2 segments. But it depends on how competitively priced you are and whether you think they're going to negotiate hard on price.
And they may collude.
Yeah.
That's what I was,
right. Right. Well, that's the issue.
They may gang up on you.
If you're concerned about that, you have to be careful about who you introduce. On the other hand, it's hard to precipitate a close and a syndicate formation if the syndicate people don't know who they are.
And they all talk to each other anyway, so, I mean, basically. But it is different than business development where, you're under strict confidentiality, you can't tell anyone. There is a certain expectation. There's a certain looseness, I would say, on the venture side with people sharing deals and chatting that you don't find on people.
And they actually like that.
Yes.
Yes.
That having done, I want to thank the panelists who, despite having a few downs, have had lots of ups, and you all will too. Good luck out there, and thank you for coming.